Today I'm going to show you guys how I recreated I Ain't Worried by One Republic. We're going to talk about how to make a surf rock guitar tone, how to layer up organic clap samples on a pop beat, and even some of the basics on how to arrange a string section. But before we get into all of that, let me introduce myself. My name is Seth. I work as a song completion producer for guitar-based pop, meaning I specialize in taking song ideas and turning them into finished tracks that are ready for Spotify. I do one of these videos every Thursday to show people how to produce their own pop music at home. Songs I've either written or produced have been featured on these Spotify curated playlists, and I did an entire album through Warner Music Group. So if you watch this video and feels like we're a good fit, check out the top link in the description and maybe we could get started on your song. All right, now to the actual video. So there's actually a bunch of sections to this beat, so I'll just kind of go over them one at a time. This first group I'm going to go over is what I would call like the live band section. Even though there's other live elements here, I just feel like this is more like a rock band style arrangement. So the first thing we're going over are these guitars. So I recorded them using this Strat, and I just sort of wanted to make a moving bass line type riff, which ironically I start writing on guitar. I started with this twang surf preset in Guitar Rig 6, tweaked it quite a bit. I would say if you're trying to replicate this tone, one of the main asks to look at is what amp you're using. So I'm using a twin reverb, a little bit of a treble boost. Again, we're going for more of a vintage style guitar tone, so you're not really going to get a lot of modern sounding distortion pedals or stuff like that. This utility is just a way for me to sum these patches to mono because it's a bit easier sometimes. Doing some high passing and low passing. High passing to get rid of some of that excess low end, but low passing to get rid of some of the grating high end. And then I wanted to make it sound sort of disgusting, so I used the Waves one knob driver, which is just sort of a very simple distortion plugin, and then some L1 to sort of tame those peaks. And both of them are going on Ascend with this Arturia plate reverb happening. Looks like I'd messed around with the EMT settings. I think I made it a little bit shorter. And I really wanted to make the reverb sound weird and degraded, so I actually threw RC20 on the reverb, which does this to it. So here's with RC20. No, off. And on. Like, it boosts a lot of the energy of it, but also the Vinyl 1 preset that I'm using a lot of the time. It has this EQ curve that is pretty spot on for what I normally do for the EQ on my reverbs, and it just kind of boosted the mid-range with distortion. But yeah, these guys are definitely the main part of the song. After that, we have this bass sound, which is just a basic P bass. I've become a really big fan of the Archetype Corey Wong plugin and the bass presets that he has in here. So I'm using the wide bass preset, running it into the DI feeder preset on Crystal Art Algae bass. And then since this is a pop song, I really wanted to get that sort of artificial low end feel, even though we were using live bass. So I used Max Bass by Waves. If I turn it off, then on, it just makes it reach a little bit lower. I know it's clipping, but I just kind of didn't care. Then we have the acoustic guitars. These guys are as basic as acoustics as you can get. I actually specifically chose an acoustic that I had that was kind of out of tune and was kind of boxy sounding because I didn't really want it to have a full sort of modern acoustic guitar recorded sound. I wanted it to have sort of like a lo-fi quality, if that makes sense. A lot of times if I'm doing acoustic guitars, I have no problem with just bus processing them, so it's basically going to be the same. Looks like I just did some high passing and then cut some of that pick attack around the 4K range, did some basic compression and limiting, and then some RC20, mainly for that warble setting, accentuate that sort of out of tune feeling, and then a little bit more distortion. On this Vinyl 1 preset, I almost always turn this vinyl noise knob all the way down. So this is without RC20. And on. Just makes it super boxy and fun. And so here's what the whole band sounds like together. Like, you can tell that's a majority of the meat, the track. So the next thing I did was the drums, and there's really two sections of drums. So here's the kick drum that I came up with. which is a mixture of two different kick drums. It looks like I'm using like a D cap drum with a little bit of transient shaping here at the end to get rid of that sustain and make that attack poke out. And then I have this BB2 bank heist kick, which is from the bedroom pop pack on Splice. And it looks like I did a lot more saturation, a little bit of high passing, and I did some transient shaping, but in the other direction. So I lowered the attack and the sustain a tiny bit, just so when you mix the two kicks together, one of them will take the attack side of it and the other will take the sustain. And then to beef them up, I added this max bass plugin. So without, with, just makes it a little beefier. And then pretty much the rest of the instruments in the track are in this non-kick group that, of course, has a compressor that is sidechained to the kick. So you can see whenever the kick hits, it's pulling everything else down a couple of dB. And I did that because I felt like this track, the kick drum is a modern kick drum that really moves everything else out of the way. And I wanted to make sure that that came through. Now we have the rest of the drums, which I would say a majority is just these guys, which are just claps. So let's go through the claps that we have. We have this one, which is more of like a rim style snare. Then we have this guy, which is more of like a spanky clap. Then we have this one, which is more of like a splatty clap. And then we have this one, which is more of like a room clap with not a lot of attack. And you can actually see on this one, like it actually like fades up. So it doesn't have as strong of a hit on the beginning as these ones do. And then I grabbed this guy, which is a group clap stack. And you can see on the grid, it's actually hitting a bit before the rest of these guys. So it sort of falls into it. You can hear sort of like, flah, flah, which kind of emulates the sound of people clapping in a room. Because whenever you get a bunch of people clapping in a room, there's always one person that does it a little bit earlier. And yeah, I don't really think any of these guys have any processing on them, except for on this group, I have this fresh air plugin. And yeah, just a little bit of plate reverb on that send. And so then I think one of the most important parts of the drum sound of this track is this guy, which is this sort of off-kilter snare thing that plays off of those claps. More than anything else, this was probably the thing I spent the most time on in this track. So I believe this is a frozen down version of a snare from the GGD Funk One Kit Wonder kit with a bunch of transient shaping and pitched up stuff after the fact, really accentuating the attack on this one. And it's sort of meant to emulate the kind of ghost note feel that a drummer would do if they were playing this as a beat. Even though it's just a giant pop beat, you can tell they clearly wanted it to feel like a drummer was playing it. And then we have the tambourine. We wanted to make sure we were hitting 16th notes, like a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a, because that's the big sort of speed element of the track. Gives it sort of a faster drum and bass feel. Got some hi-hats. And then we have a couple of clap loops here. Just sort of lightly in the background. And all together, it sound like this. Like it just gets your head moving a little bit. And then I think the only other drum parts we have are these two guys, which are a couple of crash samples that I just flew in, just so that it hit a little bit harder. No clap impact on this one. I'm surprised by myself. And then the last thing that we're going to go over is what I call this backline section, which is just huge amount of orchestration. So we'll break it down into these two sections. So the first section is this string section. So I actually did my best to try to arrange these the way that you would arrange a normal string section. And instead of trying to describe all of this, I just found this graph. Essentially, different instruments in a string section are responsible for different ranges. So you have your double bass, your cello, your viola, and your violin. And when you're arranging stuff, it's important to know what are the limitations of that instrument. So like what octave range are they normally playing in? A double bass is going to be in the exact same range as a regular bass. So I kept it a bit lower. Cellos are a bit more meatier, and they're more known for like power chords almost, so playing a lot of roots and fifths. And the violas and violins can kind of play off of each other. So I started out with the double bass. I didn't want the double bass to be super present just because we have an actual bass going right now, and I didn't want it to take up the same frequency range. And then above that, we have cello, which is doing like fifths. Then we have the violas, which are doing more octaves. And then this says viola, but these are violin. And as you can see, they're not actually playing like the full riff. They're only doing like certain hits and sections just because it didn't feel right having them play like the full syncopated part with the guitars and the bass. So I had them do a simplified version of it. I also wanted it to feel a little bit more organic. So what I did was I randomized the MIDI. As you can see, some of these are like crazy, weird and out. I believe I just selected everything and then I just did this randomize button. And obviously it made some notes way too low and way too high. So what I did was on every string track, I threw on this velocity plugin, which is under the MIDI effects. And I set the max high point and low point to be kind of in the range that I wanted them to be. This kind of made it feel a little bit more organic to me. Again, I know you can do it better probably in Ableton 11, but I'm still new to Ableton 11. For the actual string library themselves, I'm actually just using like the default Contact stuff, which honestly, I've gotten a lot of great use out of. So for every instrument, I've just gone to the ensemble version. Since I'm doing a lot of split octave stuff, I've turned off the reverb and I've set it to pizzicato. These are set up to keys, so you can dynamically change them in the performance, but I pretty much only wanted pizzicato stuff, which is that sort of plucking motion. And so for all these guys, I basically used the same effects chain. I used an EQ to sort of narrow in on the range that I wanted them to be playing. A little bit of a mid scoop if I felt like it was too woofy, and then a little bit of a glue compressor to lightly level it out a bit. And then on the double bass, since we already had a lot of low information happening, I did some transient shaping where I shortened the stain. I also shortened the release of the plugin itself and then gated it because I didn't want that low end information ringing out. And then on the group, doing a little bit of MoTT to make them a little bit more present, and then some Kramer tape. Again, degrading the high end, but also giving them some saturation. So here's the strings with everything turned off. Again, that sounds really cool, but this is a pop beat and we kind of need everything to be controlled. And here's what they sound like with the processing on them. To me, it just felt like they fit in the mix a lot more with this processing on them. And then lastly, we have the horn. In the original song, I just hear these horns stab on the one. So they're only doing these one hits. Not the best horn sounds, honestly, but they get the job done. And they're not like one of the main instruments. So I have this session horns plugin doing sort of like a wide octave with a fifth in between. And then below that, I have a bari sax just doing a lower octave, blending them together in a group with some MoTT, L1 for level control, and again, some Kramer tape. So with the processing off, with it on, and then at the very end, the last thing to look at is we have this guy, which is this patch in Arcade by Output. I wanted to get a whistle sample, but I couldn't find one, and I didn't want to go through the effort of trying to find one, so I just found something that was whistle-like. EQ'd it, MoTT to add some presence, some H delay on a ping pong setting, and ROM to give it space. And those are all the musical elements. For the master, didn't do anything too special. If you watched any of my other videos in the past, this is a pretty normal chain for me. For my parallel compression, I pretty much exclusively have swapped over to this, the virtual bus compressor Slate. I'm also starting to use my linear multiband, again, doing a bit more saturation with Fab Filter, still using Infinity EQ for my stereo imaging control, and then a couple of limiters to get the volume that I'm wanting. And yeah, that's it. All right, now let's listen to what the full thing sounds like. If you guys have enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe. Again, I do one of these videos every Thursday. If you have any specific questions about anything I've done in here, please comment it down below. I'm pretty good at replying to comments, so if you need me to expand on something, I'd be more than happy to. Also, if you enjoyed this video, you should check out the one that I did last week where I recreated Left and Right by Charlie Puth and Jungkook from BTS. And yeah, hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next week.